Hey friends, how's it going? It's been a while, we're back. Not working on the Corvette. The Corvette's currently on hold. I might get to it again at some point, but right now, I've got other things I'm working on, and I don't really have the funds to continue that, but we're working on the Cadillac today. We will be doing the front passenger side wheel bearing today. And some of the things I've done to prepare is I have used some penetrating oil and I have soaked down the bolt on the arm here, lower control arm there. There's a bolt on the backside bottom there. And then we're gonna get ready to take off this bracket right here using the bolts on the back here. It's like an 18 millimeter. Some of the tools we're using today: impact wrench, using a couple different ratchets. We have a wrench, we got a hex bit, we've got a star bit, and that's really all we'll need. We'll probably need a ball joint separator or tie rod separator to separate the ball joints here when we get in there, because the easiest way to do this job is to replace the hub, the arm, and this dust bracket on the back side of the hub right there. Way easier than trying to use a slide hammer and just remove this hub, and I'll show you when we get in there. If you haven't done so already, be sure to go down below, hit that subscribe button, click those notifications so you get notified whenever I do work on one of my vehicles. As I mentioned, we're gonna take off the caliper right here. We're gonna pull off the bracket and the caliper at the same time. So instead of removing the bolts on the caliper, we're gonna remove the bracket bolts that are mounted to the back side of this arm in here. And they're an 18 millimeter. There's one bolt here on the top and one bolt on the bottom we're gonna get. To make it easier to access those bolts, I did turn the steering wheel out, so it's kind of out in an angle there. So now I've got more room on the back side here to get to those caliper bracket bolts. I'll just point it out again here. One bolt here on the bottom connects to this part of the steering knuckle assembly right here. And then the other one is right up here at the top. Both 18 millimeter. Should come out fairly easily. All right, and then once those are out, we're gonna go ahead and pull this assembly off of here. Might have to use like a pry bar or something to pry it out. And then we're gonna use a caliper hanger. Just kind of hang up on one of your coil springs right up on here, and we'll hang it from there, and that'll keep this brake line from kinking up. But while we're back here, we're also gonna take out this little bolt right here that's holding this wheel speed sensor cable and brake hose onto the back of this arm. So those are out of the way as well. And the bolt holding that hose on, and the cable just a 10 millimeter. Now as you can see, I've got that unbolted, so that will just kind of slide off there. And then we've got to come to the other side here, and I believe it's a 10 millimeter bolt right back here as well, holding this wheel speed sensor in. We're gonna take that out as well. As I mentioned, we'll use like a screwdriver or a pry bar. I put between the rotor and this bracket, pry it out to loosen that, and I'm gonna do that on the bottom, loosen it. This whole assembly is going to come off as one piece. Like I said, I'm just going to hang it right there quick. And that's kind of how that little hanger works right there. I just put it through one of the openings. Now that bracket's head there, you don't have to worry about any strain on the hose or anything right there. On the front side of the rotor, there is this little bolt right here. It uses like a Torx head. I'm going to grab my Torx socket there, put it on there. I'm going to take that out. I did end up using my impact wrench on there. It was in there pretty good. Just be careful not to strip that bolt out. And if you do, you'll have to use like a, bolt extractor to get it out. And you don't have to put this back in when you reassemble, but I mean, may as well. It'll hold it in place while you put the brake caliper back in. Next part's gonna be super important. To get the rotor off, use a rubber mallet to kind of beat around the rotor to loosen up all the gunk, and then we'll kind of softly tap it on the back. But I'm gonna go around and do that really quick, get this rotor loosened up so I can pull it off of the hub assembly right there. Okay, I have tried beating this rotor off, and I've even used some PB Blaster along the outside here and even back in the holes there to try to get it off, and it is stuck. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and remove the whole assembly, just leave the rotor on, and once we get it off, I'll kind of lay it face down on the ground and beat from the back and hopefully get it off. But next steps, we've got to unbolt that tie rod right there. We're going to unbolt the upper ball joint, and then down on the bottom here, There's a lower ball joint that we've got to get to right down there. And I'm hoping that we can get to that even with the rotor in place. I think we can. And then these are just a 18 millimeter. And if you start spinning these and you find that the whole stud and everything is turning, there is like a hole on them. It's easier to see probably on this upper ball joint. There's an inside little notch there, and that's where like a hex socket or an Allen wrench will fit to hold that stud in place while you unthread the nut that's on there. Just something to be aware of. And that's kind of how you're gonna hold it. You'll see I've got the hex socket up in the center of that bolt there, and then I'm gonna use the wrench to turn the nut on the stud there to loosen it. And that's honestly how you have to do this top one. I do remember that from the other side, and maybe the bottom one, but definitely the upper ball joint had to be done this way. And then before I disassemble this all the way, I am gonna go ahead and remove the axle nut right here. This is the all-wheel drive, so there's a CV shaft on the front of the vehicle. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull that nut off right there as well. Sometimes when you're trying to turn that off, it'll turn your whole hub and everything. What you can do is use like 3 lug nuts on there and use a pry bar and hold it in place this way. Kind of hold it in place as you're doing that, so that way it doesn't move on you when you're loosening that. So you can use those 3 in any combination there to be able to hold them however you need to get leverage on there. Kind of like just different ways like that, but that's just a helpful little tip when pulling out this big axle nut. Something else you could do before removing the CV shaft here, if you had a big like 2-jaw clamp, you could clamp that on the outside of this rotor and then use the center hub here to probably pull that rotor off if it's stuck like mine is. My upper ball joint, it wasn't stuck in the arm or anything, so it popped right out. But now that actually gives me some room to move stuff around. One thing we're gonna have to do is pull out that wheel speed sensor right there, so that way we don't damage that. So if you wiggle around, it should just come right out. And then now we can kind of set that off to the side. Fortunately, this came out. If this was stuck in yours or broken, you can order a new one. And then it just kind of comes up along there. And then there's a clip right back there. And you could replace it by just unclipping it there and running the new speed sensor into the arm right there. And then to get that tie rod out, it just took a couple tiny taps with mine to pop it out of there. If it was in there tighter, you can use a ball joint fork or a tie rod fork to get that to separate as well. So far, mine haven't been stuck together, unlike this rotor, which is super annoying. So far it's coming apart pretty easily. So now I've just got to get back into the bottom over here, and this is where the lower ball joint is, right there. That's the only piece still connecting the steering knuckle to the vehicle, and then the CV shaft, which will slide out the back there. So we're gonna come down here, unbolt this, and hopefully this separates as easily as the rest of the assembly has so far. Same thing on the steering shaft, or the CV shaft here. A couple light taps loosened it up for me. So you can see mine, it will slide out, or can push it back in now. So we'll be able to get that separated from the CV shaft without a problem. And then I just turned the steering knuckle all the way forward, allowed me to finish popping out the CV shaft from the back side of the hub right there. And this is where, if you wanted to attempt to remove this hub, you could. There's these 3 bolts on the back you would have to take out. But I can tell you, just from doing the rears and doing the front driver's side, there's no way I'm getting this hub separated. So that's why I'm replacing this entire steering knuckle, because it's easier to do this than to struggle with that hub. And the bottom ball joint, same as the top, does have the opening for like the hex wrench or socket to go in to hold it in place while you spin the nut here. You're gonna probably have the same type of issue as that top one. I'll get that assembly, I'll get that unbolted really quick, and we'll see if we can get this thing pulled apart. And here is that steering knuckle assembly with the wheel hub attached to it off. You can see the ring on the back there. That is why the lights all came on the dash, and the stabilization control, all that stuff stopped working. That ring is destroyed, and this hub needs replaced anyway. It was growling and grinding. And now that I've got this off, I'm gonna try to get this rotor off so I can at least use that still. And then that lower ball joint, just like with the top one, a couple light little taps, and it popped right out of the steering knuckle thing right here. Now, obviously, to do a wheel hub, you don't have to do this. I'm just showing you guys the easy way to do this on this Cadillac because those hubs rust to that aluminum steering knuckle. The hub's like a metal steel inside of aluminum. Over the years, heating up, expanding, rust forms. They get stuck together. And for anyone that's ever tried to do one of these, you know how hard it is to get these things separated. And as you've seen, this process isn't really that difficult. It's just a matter of a few bolts, a CV shaft, removing the brake assembly, and then this whole thing comes out as one big piece, and we're gonna assemble the new parts on the car in basically the reverse order, but the way you would normally do it. We'll put the steering hub on here first probably, and then put it in the vehicle, and then just reassemble. I'll link all the parts I'm using and some tools you'll need. There's not really a lot of tools. I mean, that right there, and then an impact wrench are really all I've used to this point. So this isn't a super complicated process. You don't need a lot of specialty tools. You will need like a CV shaft nut tool. That's a pretty good size socket. And you'll need up to like 22 millimeter for like the lower ball joint and then 18 millimeter for the upper ball joints. But this is stuff most people probably have in their garage. Like I said, even if you're just gonna do the hub, this is probably the easiest way to do this, is to remove this knuckle first, unbolt the hub now from the back, and then try to disassemble them. Like I said, I'm not even gonna try it. I spent a week trying to do that on the other side of this car about a year and a half ago. I am not doing that again. Just in case anyone has the same problem I do with the rotor stuck on, what I've done is I put the wheel lug nuts back on the studs, and I'm gonna lay this thing flat on the ground. Now I'm gonna use my rubber mallet, again, not this metal one, and I'm gonna beat the back of this rotor and kind of spin around. Oh, see, look at that, it already just came loose. Hitting it on the back, loosen that for me. So now I can just go to the front, pull those off, and my rotor is loose and ready for the new assembly. Look at all of that rust and buildup on the inside of that rotor. No wonder why that thing was stuck onto that wheel bearing. But look at this wheel bearing. That thing is nasty. And again, it's just all corroded and gross. And it is going to be basically fused or welded to the steering knuckle. And since I am not pulling the hub off, I had to order a new dust plate as well. So make sure if you're going to do it this way, which I definitely recommend doing, get yourself steering knuckle, the dust plate, new hub, and then now would be a good time to do rotors, brake pads, all that stuff if you wanted as well. For this job, I am using GM parts or AC Delco parts to do this. Here's the dust shield, and then there's the new gold wheel hub that I'll be using. And again, I'll put a description and link to all this stuff down below. There's that new steering knuckle that we're gonna put in there and labeled right side, so we know it's the right one. There's that nice new dust shield in front of that steering knuckle right there, and we'll get the bolts off of the old assembly, and it gets mounted kind of like that right there. And then the wheel hub will go on the outside of this piece. Here's that nice brand new AC Delco Gold Series wheel hub that we'll be putting on this assembly. From this old assembly, I do need to pull these bolts out that hold that wheel hub on so I can use them on this new assembly to mount it all together. So we're gonna pull those off really quick. And these guys here were just a 13 millimeter. You can see there was some red thread locker on them, so we'll make sure we use that when we put together this new assembly right here. And then that's everything we need off that old assembly, and we're going to put everything back together now on this one and reassemble it. Something that's not necessary, but I'm going to use some anti-seize lubricant. I'm just going to put a little bit around here. That way, if I ever do need to disassemble this again, I'll have a better chance of maybe pulling it apart. I'd probably just do it this way again, but I'm going to put that in there just in case. Something else very important, do not use an impact wrench to reassemble this. Tighten it by hand and then torque it down using a torque wrench. There is our wheel hub, our wheel bearing, steering knuckle, dust shield assembled. So now we are going to go ahead and mount this back on the car, starting with that lower ball joint. Hi guys, it's Pip. So you know what that means. That means it is time to take a break. Pip kind of got a haircut, sort of. Good stuff. Hey Pip, what are you doing, buddy? He's just hanging out while I work on the car today. So we're gonna go ahead and get this thing reassembled. I've got everything just kind of loosely assembled now. Nothing's tightened all the way, so that way I can make sure everything's kind of where it should be. You gotta make sure I put the speed sensor back in, tighten that down. Then we're going to go through and torque everything down, and then we'll get the brakes put back on, and this thing's about done. Okay, so upper ball joint, tie rod, lower ball joint all done. And then just like when removing the CV shaft nut, put some lug nuts on here, and then use this to kind of hold it in place as you tighten it, because this thing is going to try to turn when you do this. And I'm not gonna be able to do it with two hands, but you can hold that in place and then tighten it down like that. And at the very end, once it's down, grab that torque wrench, set it to the torque for your nut. And it's different by year, so you'll have to look it up for whichever year you're doing, 2008, 9, 10, 11, they're all different. And this is a 2013, and it's a 35 millimeter nut that's on this one. Something you'll notice about this wheel hub, it does not have the little bolt hole for that rotor bolt, so we're just going to assemble this and it will not use that. You may have to pull this outside brake pad off and then use like a clamp to push the inner pad in by depressing those pistons a little bit. Or if you get lucky, they'll just slide right onto the rotor because you're using the same rotor, same pads, and it'll just go back together. Then what you'll do is on the back side, you'll just line up the bracket with the bolt there. And then I believe there was some red thread sealant on those as well, so we'll just make sure to do that. Then the only thing we really have to do is going to be to bolt this bracket back to the steering knuckle right here using that screw bolt that came out right there. And there it is, guys. Better get that hanger out of there. But there it is, fully reassembled hub assembly with brand new steering knuckle. Way quicker, way easier than trying to do just a hub. Trust me on this one, I've done it before. Now the only thing I've got left is to put the wheel back on, grab my code scanner, go inside, reset the codes, and should be good to go. If you don't have a code scanner, I'll leave a link to one down below. They're pretty inexpensive to do this car. Otherwise, just go to your local auto parts store. A lot of those guys will reset codes for you and stuff as well. And if you'd like to help support the YouTube channel, support on the Corvette, there is a link up in the header you can click to do donations. All donations 100% go to these vehicles. It'd go to the Corvette, as I do have a Corvette fund going. Otherwise, just be sure to subscribe to my video down below. I appreciate that a ton, and that helps right there. You may have noticed today I'm sporting a Dredful Performance cap. We do have caps, shirts, sweatshirts, all kinds of stuff available. Link below for that as well. Reassembled, code reset, good to go. Hope you guys liked the video, and until next time.